Welcome, gentlemen, to this forum. And thanks for the audience for coming back and attending this session just after the lunch. And I hope, as John rightly said, that everybody enjoyed the first half of this conference. And what we are going to address today is about crisis management. Is it the right time to address that? Yeah, we believe it's not only the right time, but it's really one of the hot topics as we witness. So I have different panelists with different background and experience. So thank you very much again, John, for joining us. So my first question will be about crisis communication and crisis management. A big word, a buzzword. Do we really need, in this era of digitalization in 2023, something named crisis management? So this is a question I have. And how are we going to really present that and get the buy-in from the C-suite if we need to do so as we talk? So, look, do you want to take it? Or who is want to do on this? David?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk to sort of better preparing and looking at expecting the unexpected. You know, I think what we've learned over the last 2 years since, I guess, Afghan was the first big one, and then Ukraine is the obvious one, probably most spoken about at the moment. And then things like Turkey, and now the most recent, obviously, point in time is Sudan. I think it's really, really important to go through sort of 4 steps to plan for this. So looking at situational awareness, and as Peter O'Connell said earlier, shared agreement, the human element of sense. It's really, really important to have that situational awareness of what is actually going on in the world, what is real, what is fiction. The second thing to look at would be sort of the assessment and interpretation of an analysis of information. So the interpretation of information, what does it mean, what's the cause, what's the effect, and based on that information, looking at step 3, which is forecasting. So when forecasting, looking at, having the ability to envisage sort of scenarios based on short-term, medium-term, long-term, multiple scenarios, looking at what's the most likely forecast, what's the most likely to happen, looking at, planning for worst case, hoping for best case, and then based on that information, coming up with a decision-making tool, looking at decision-making and the power of decision-making as a science and having tools behind it. So looking at the forecast, looking at the scenarios, having a plan, and then working to, looking at triggers, having someone actually physically looking at triggers, setting thresholds with a decision-making workflow. So if this happens, you do this, etc., and then being adaptable on that plan. I think some lessons learned briefly is, one, tenacity. You just got to keep trying. If we look at Afghanistan as an option, we just had to keep trying and trying and trying every day. It was difficult. It was a challenging environment. Then, being completely adaptable. We had a junior analyst come back from leave who looked at us in Afghanistan and went, you've been trying this. You've been spending your resources doing supply runs, constantly aiming at trying to get them out, but you've got these resources. Focus the resources on, look at the accessibility of going up to Pakistan through the Torkham border. We've got great teams in Pakistan. Let's put that to the test. And we actually evacuated all our people through the Torkham border. And then, don't look at people don't expect them to be rational. We had a couple of hundred people that we needed, a few hundred people we needed to get out of Ukraine at one point. The granny in Ukraine, example, she didn't want to leave. So where do you draw the line? Do you extend to extended family? People didn't want to leave their pets behind. People were desensitized to conflict. They've been in conflict since 2014. All of these things are things you need to take into consideration.
Oh, thank you very much, Luke. And I feel you very comfortable because I know that it's your butter and bread in terms of what your company is doing. But when I hear that, it makes me the comfort that's very good. I have the plan. Everybody is trained. We are good to go. Is it really the reality between the plan and the scenario? Because we all know that the plan is good, but I'm wondering, is there something we need to work out regarding the difference between what we had in terms of plan and the scenario we had. What do you think, Nigel?
Yeah, I think it's too many people spend far too much time talking about the scenarios, planning scenarios, and trying to get as much reality as they can into their desktop exercises or any of their training. Slightly controversially, I'd say forget the scenario. The scenario is actually irrelevant because too many people are asking, how do we know what the unknowns are? Well, the fact they're unknowns means you won't. So look at the business, take out a function of that business and what happens to that business, that region, that country, that operational setup when you remove a function. It doesn't matter why it's been removed. So remove communication, good scenario or good part of a scenario for Sudan. That's been the biggest issue, is actually communicating. Remove your resupply, remove your fuel, remove your power. Another part, it doesn't matter what the cause is, but when you get to that point and you've got an event or you've got an incident that removes part of the function of your business, then you've got an idea of how to cope with it.
Good. So in fact, the plan is not enough. So
Plan's not enough. If you're prepared, there's a lot of people talk about, I've made these plans and I've got all these contingency plans, and they all stick on in a file somewhere or they're on a shelf. If the business is prepared because it's taking itself through some training, through some desktop exercises, if it's looked at which functions are essential and which functions they don't think are essential, but what effect would that have if you didn't have that function, then the business is prepared. Then when the event comes, you get down to the planning, because that scenario is going to lead exactly what you're dealing with.
Clear. So I like the methodology. So we have the plan, we have the drill, we are careful to be sure that we understand the scenario and not to invest too much time, but getting people on the ground. Very good. What do we know about this in theory? So if we want to replicate all these concepts in terms of methodology on a practical hand-on, on the ground, how this would be happening? What do you think?
Well,
Study case.
I can give you the case for Sudan, because that's poignant and that's exactly what we're dealing with at the moment. In the whole of our crisis management situations, from Haiti to Afghanistan to Ukraine and so on, Sudan's changed the rule book in a lot more ways. We always say no plan survives contact. We've got several principles in our risk and crisis management around all our globe. We apply the same principles. Whenever there's a situation, my clients demand that they go in first. We look after the international news crews, and they just have to be there reporting on the earthquake, the tsunami, the crisis, the conflict, the war. So our teams essentially deploy almost immediately to look after our news crews and provide them with what they need. We specialize in high-risk travel, and putting the news crews at the forefront of the high risk, it affords us to be able to then do evacuations, contingency planning, and then into humanitarian. And we've had a well-trodden path in all the areas that we've been operating in, and it follows a very logical, it's not rocket science. We need boots on the ground, we need fuel, we need logistics, we need cash in country to pay our vendors, we need medical supplies, and we need safe houses, the routes, etc., etc. But Sudan has thrown everything out of sync, because our clients still demand that we have exactly the same services, but doing this in an active civil conflict presents a question that we don't like answering. That what is the risk factor of actually bringing our guys and succeeding in extracting people alive? And when you can't give that 100% guarantee, it makes it extremely difficult for our clients to approve our plans, no matter what level of mitigation we get. So everyone in my offices around the world have started to try and think about crisis management, and no matter how much mitigation we've got at the moment, the problem with Sudan is now's the window to actually do the extractions. We've got everything ready to go. Now's the window to start the extractions. Whilst they've got a so-called ceasefire, bear in mind in the last hour, the ceasefire was reiterated, but Khartoum was still bombed. So these are the risk and the challenge that's presenting new questions to do with the whole of crisis management and advising our clients. As for communications, clearly this is key. It's a matter of time before any conflict zone runs out of communications. And without communications, the coordination for this becomes almost impossible. So thinking advance, we've got to think about sat phones and other methods of communications before the networks go down, as we saw in Pakistan the other day. And as for the road to recovery, we're not even past the first hurdle yet. This could go on for a long time with this civil conflict, so we're just planning for all contingencies with a humanitarian end state.
Oh, thank you very much to that, and our best wishes for the companies and the government who still have personnel in Sudan and other part of the world where there is a conflict. And I think it's the perfect path you gave me here, David. It's about communication, and it's the big elephant in the room. communication today in this era of 2023 where the velocity of event between natural disasters, civil unrest, and likewise crisis is really based on communication. So today we know roughly what we are, okay? So it's about redundancy, it's about multi-level communication, but I'll be interested to hear, so I got it from you, communication critical. If you lose it, you are not able to coordinate anything. What do you think, Luke and Nigel, about what could be in terms of communication? Two tips per communication redundancy. What do you think could be done?
I think it's how do you communicate fragility? And you asked for a case study, just now with David. So, fantastic company working in Ukraine for years and years, 100+ staff. 4 weeks before the war started, they sent each of their employees $3,000. Not an insignificant amount when added together, and asked their employees to take that out, withdraw it, take it in cash, buy supplies, buy water, make themselves self-reliant, and have an amount of cash literally in their back pocket. So if the worst did happen, they'd be able to resupply themselves or move out of country. That was met with, you Westerners, you haven't been through this the last 4 or 6 years, you don't know what's going to happen, we Ukrainians, we're fine. When it did come down to it, the problem was, relayed from the ground, we can't use that money because it's still in the banks and the banks aren't working. What's the communication fall down there? It's more sort of parachuting in your solution, from an executive or from a corporate headquarters, rather than trying to see what the situation is from the lens of people on the ground before you get to that fragile state, before the event happens. Finding the cultural architects on the ground rather than purely the leadership on the ground, and getting from them what they see as a solution or what they see as preparedness rather than what the headquarters sees as preparedness. Melding those two together and then delivering ideally in advance of the incident or the evolution.
Okay, so very, very good. I think it's very important that corporate need to be avoided, to be shy about it. There is a crisis, you need to communicate that and cascade down to the team saying, yeah, we are in a difficult position, you need to be careful and you need to buy and prepare yourself. Yeah, and I think most of the time the common sense from the corporate team will come say, no, we don't want to panic anyone, okay? Keep it as it is, we are going to handle it. Reality may be different from the scenario and you may not have a big window of opportunity to assess, but what do you think, Luc, about this communication?
I think communication, on multiple levels, right? So from the perspective of communicating with the clients or the people that aren't in the crisis itself and are watching from out there, communicating communication failures and managing expectations with communication, like we've seen in Sudan, we were well placed, we had guys on the ground, but we can't get hold of them. I think one thing that was quite surprising, and it's been quite a common theme from people I've been speaking to the past few days here in Dubai, is that, GSM, SIM cards, just the network goes down, right? Sudan, there's 3 main providers. Most of the time, at least 2 of them are down. So you can't phone them. You can't phone your guys on the ground. You can't text them. But what seems to be quite consistent is that, they will find a hotspot at some point and they will be able to communicate over WhatsApp. So it's just knowing that send the message, it will get delivered at some point, it will get received, it will be communicated back to you, and just managing the expectations of the clients. They are going to get back to us at some point. We can't do any better than that. There's a comms issue in country. Just accept it and be completely honest. I think this industry is obviously quite full of smoke and mirrors, and that's why we don't do subcontractor chains and we don't get involved in this mess, because if you don't have direct contact with the guy on the ground and you're in the subcontractor chain, if there's a comms outage that gets delayed to you, the mess is just a nightmare. So just accurate, honest communication with everybody, and be honest about your capabilities as well. I think that's a really, really big point to push on this.
Yeah, honesty about your capability, and I think this is also a very valid point. You need to be sure that the vendor you are selecting in the country is able to deliver what they are promising, or allegedly being able to deliver. And this is important, especially when you know that some companies may allegedly state that they have people on the ground, though they may not have, and vice versa. No, I got it, and I think it's a very good point. What I want is really, if you are the CEO of your own company, what are you going to give as feedback to your CSO or security officer regarding how to manage a crisis in your position as a business leader, because let's not forget, the resources and the funding are limited, okay, irrespective of what you do. Crisis is sometimes a crisis, but it's also an opportunity for the security function, the cyber function, to really raise and show the value it has for the business in terms of saving life, duty of care, and also business continuity when the situation resumes. So 2 tips per person. What do you think, if you had to say 2 things, 2 tips per, what are you going to say?
I think, yes, I use this a lot, but slow is smooth and smooth is fast. You know, if you're panicking or you're running, you
Come again, it was too fast for me. So
slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Okay.
So just, you know, control the controllables, accept what you can't control, and just be honest.
It was 3.
Question all the technology they brought into your company. It's great with the magpie effect, oh, we love this app, or we love that, and then really dive down into it, or probably actually not dive down, but ask one question: what does it take for that technology to fail? Because at the end of all of the apps and all the automation and the machine learning and the AI and everything else we talk about today, a lot of which is very valid, when it comes to the crunch, one part or a lot of those parts will fail. They'll fail quickly and they'll fail very easily. So how quickly and how do you go back to basics?
Very good. So it's about redundancy on what you are going to use in terms of communication. Makes sense?
Always completely 100% trust our operations guys on the ground. It's okay us in the management in our air-conditioned offices, but believe what the operators say, trust them, and back them 100%. And never rely on technology. At some stage, it's going to go down, so make sure you've always got the redundancy and the contingency.
Very good. So you just ruined the whole seance because we are saying technology since the beginning. Sorry, this was out of script. But I think it's coming back to what has been said previously. Technology is good. We need to embrace it. But again, we need to be careful not to rely entirely on this, because if we rely on this, it's one point of reliance, it's one point of failure. So no, I think it was a very, very good points raised here. What I want to, on the 2 remaining minutes today, what will be the role of the regulation or the country here? Okay, none of us are private, I would say, can substitute themselves to the government, yeah? So we are operating in Sudan or other country. Where do you think authorities can help when there is still authority? Briefly.
I think it goes down to, I mean, that needs to be assessed on a case-by-case basis, you know. The authorities that you rely on in Sudan, you know, they're at conflict. The 2 sort of regulatories that you deal with are both fighting each other. So, you know, I think in a Sudan case, you'd want to just stay out the way and just get out of the radar or shelter in place or whatever you have the ability to do. But, you know, in places like Ukraine, where there's quite a level of corruption that you need to accept or explore or exploit, you know, where do you draw the line? But a case-by-case basis has to be.
I think engage with the private sector. There's a lot of these authorities that are regulating the private sector, but they don't engage with it. So when the event happens, the crisis happens, or the emergency starts getting more serious, if they haven't engaged with the private sector to understand how the private sector can actually help, particularly in our sector, then they get lost, and they've restricted it or legislated it so heavily it can't actually do its job.
In my business, which is the private sector, all my clients demand that we obviously obey the regulations of that country until it becomes a broken state, in which case we report exactly our plans. Even in the case of, for example, Ukraine in the early days when it's corrupt, we still operate within the legal jurisdictions as far as our compliance. Rules tend to be broken when it's an absolute emergency, as we experienced in some parts of Ukraine and Sudan.
Very good. So my take on this is that you need, of course, irrespective of the nature of the crisis, first you need to proactively engage with the private sector, because it's a community which can help each other, and the government and the authority are definitely part of it. The second one, be careful not to act as a cowboy through your service provider. There is, in all crises, there are, of course, the risk of liability and reputational damage, okay, irrespective how you tackle it. And I think this is a very important point, which I'm going to close with, is when you take your car for maintenance and you rely on the person who is going to fix your car, same things go for the people and operation. Ensure proactively that your procurement or finance team in fact, identified the right professional service provider, and ideally you should have one or two or three probably to have redundancy. Does make sense? Yeah? Thank you very much for your time and experience. Really appreciate it. Please applaud the team.
Thank you. Cheers, guys.